I would, assuming Thurman, I would add, I think also what may be an opportunity for Oakland and other cities is to expand the conversation, especially, with the tech companies, but also with the larger companies like the healthcare industry, that there are a range of opportunities for investing back locally that will both assist the bottom line and also be of use to the community. Many of those companies, tech companies and health companies, contract. And so there are vendor opportunities that we ought to be exploring in a much more targeted and specific way. It's an opportunity to build on small companies that are trying to become larger companies and also entrepreneurs who are trying to get into the small business arena, and creating an environment and opportunity for those dollars to flow through those companies. And as we know, most mid-sized to small businesses are much more likely to hire locally, so they will hire residents and individuals who are in the communities that that they're in and that they serve, and that's a larger conversation, I think, that will provide a much larger range of opportunities from an employment standpoint that you can then build on. And so a lot of that conversation is beginning to happen. I do want to single out Kaiser as one who has been very active in that conversation. They are a huge, contractor and vendor provider in terms of dollars, and they have, indicated a real desire to ensure that the local community and especially, businesses who are owned by women and people of color get an opportunity within the context of that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Head. And I would ask that you and Mayor Schaaf include Assemblymember Bonta and I as you look at ways to create these pathways. If you see an opportunity for us to push people, help influence people's thought process, especially corporate partners, and then our conversations around how we align what happens in K-12 education to make sure that our students are getting access to computer science early, that they're getting access to technology. We all know that all young people are consumers of these products. Why should they not benefit from the tremendous number of opportunities that exist, whether they be in traditional tech or in healthcare or other sectors, as you said? And Mr. Head, I wanted to visit the data that you talked about. I know the chair is going to talk about it. You all talked about the importance of data, and I know that the chair has really been pushing for more disaggregation of data, and perhaps that you all can lend support, but the chair will talk about that more. I was thinking about data in terms of in Alameda County, I hear mixed reports all the time about the number of young people who have had contact with the criminal justice system and the recidivism rate. And my concern is that in Alameda County and statewide, we need to do a better job of putting wraparound programs in place to help young people when they leave juvenile hall, when they leave the camps, group homes, that we put programs in place to help them find a job, get their education, have stable housing, so that we don't see, I've heard estimates as high as 90% recidivism rate in Alameda County. It has been hard, though, to get firm data about what is the case, and it's been hard to get clarity about what wraparound programs really do exist. And we spent some time in the last couple of weeks working with young men in Camp Sweeney, talking about how to build a better wraparound program. And everybody came up to us and said, "Oh, we got this already. Don't worry. It's all handled." And I said, well, if it's all handled, why are these young men who are in Camp Sweeney saying to me, can you help me get an interview so I can learn about an internship? And that meaning that the programs are not able to connect with the youth. And I guess the direct question would be, can the East Bay Community Foundation lend support to us in our efforts to have this conversation about what wraparound looks like for these youth in Alameda County? And hopefully there'll be some examples that we can use for other communities in the state.
Yeah, we would be more than happy to be of service in doing that. I think we've had a long-standing relationship with, especially with the work, for example, done at Camp Sweeney, and trying to expand the number of opportunities for the young people who go through there and come through. I remember specifically a number of grants that we've made for those young people who want to get involved in the medical field from the standpoint of opportunities to be medical assistants. And I think that it is difficult to determine sort of what the data says. Part of that, I think, has to be a much more deeper level of involvement with the district attorney's office and others where we know some of this data resides, and making sure that we're getting as full a picture of who's coming back into that system as possible. I do want to say that I think that part of what we've thought about, and I think is as important, and this was described a little bit by Fred Blackwell, is we've determined to a great extent that probably the best solution we could have is to not have those young people end up in that system.
That's right.
And so we are doing, I think, a significant amount of work to figure out how to head that off, because we think that is guaranteed 100% the best opportunity. But at the same time, those young people who do end up in that system, you're right, do need a significant amount of support. Them and their families as they come out of that system, and there are lots of organizations again that are trying to do that work. But I think we could do it a lot more specifically and strategically in terms of impact and success.
Well, I was thinking about the $233,000 a year that you said they're spending in LA County to incarcerate youth. If we took a fraction of that, just a fraction of that, to get at those youth who are leaving systems and they're reoffending because they don't have the right structures and support, that we could do a lot of great work. So we're looking forward to working with you. I am one who's honored to have you both in our citizenry, and looking forward to working with both of you. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment, because you both raised the issue of data and how important that is, and I agree that it's critical to inform the best policies and path forward and steps that we take together. And specifically, the issue of API disaggregated data was raised. And I had a bill that sought to increase the categories for disaggregated data collection in the state of California last year, AB 176, and it went through both houses with just one no vote, got into the governor's desk, and the governor unfortunately saw fit to veto the bill. We're back again this year with AB 1726. We think it's super important as a broader community to make sure that every community is counted, none is rendered invisible, and that the experiences of every community is revealed. Right now, certain experiences of certain communities are being concealed within more monolithic data groups, and that's a problem. And so we need to pull out that data to inform the action that we take. It is very helpful to hear that foundations and nonprofits and other leaders in our community are interested in this, and we would love to grow our support list. So we will engage you on that and seek your support for that. I think it would help to, in particular, our governor, to hear about how it can be important in serving many of our underserved and disadvantaged communities. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to our next panel from Stockton. We have Councilmember Michael Tubbs from the City of Stockton and Sammy Nunez, Executive Director, Fathers and Families of San Joaquin. Good to see you both again. Thank you for joining us once again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to be uncharacteristically brief because Mr. Nunez and my brother here have a lot of good, exciting work to share. But first, I want to thank you and the Select Committee for the work you all have been doing for many years in raising the profile of the status of boys and men of color in California. Your work doesn't go unnoticed at the local level, and thank you. In And specificity in Stockton, our work is really rooted around the question asked in the Bible when God talks to Cain and said, "Where is your brother Abel?" And Cain has no idea or no answer. And for far too long in Stockton, for many generations, it was the same thing. That oftentimes when it came to where were our young men of color when it comes to college degrees or when it comes to employment or it comes to positive life outcomes, where were they? And institutions, organizations, and leaders were not able to answer that. But thanks to the leadership of Mr. Nunez and other community-based organizations over the past decade, but more so accelerating in the past several years, we now have answers for that we now have institutions collecting data and also working together differently in the collective impact strategies that Mayor Schaaf outlined earlier. In terms of the Stockton work, I think there's really 4 themes that really emerge. I think the first one and probably the most obvious one is that unlike the other communities representing today, Stockton doesn't have a large foundation or a large philanthropic partner or a large corporate sponsor to do this work. And it's been a blessing and a curse. The blessing has been the work has been forced to be rooted in community and leveraging existing resources. The curse has been resources do matter, so there's a lot of great work we could be doing and a lot of things we could be expanded upon, but without an East Bay Community Foundation or without a San Francisco Community Foundation or without a foundation rooted in the community or without being a building healthy community sites, it kind of doesn't allow us to go as far as we would go. And I share that because I think most communities in California are more like Stockton than the others in that they're not incredibly resource rich. They don't have a large number of corporate sponsors to draw upon, but they still have young men of color in their communities that need to do the work. So I love the bill you guys are proposing with the $100 million spending allocation. I would just ask that in the spending of that, in the allocation of that there's some way to prioritize communities that this may be the only source of funding to do this important work, and they can't really draw on other assets. The second theme building on the first is this idea that solutions do exist in communities, but oftentimes, again, the resources don't. I've been amazed at sitting at the table with especially Mr. Nunez and his group and talking to formerly incarcerated folks or talking to people who have been victims of gun violence or who know people who have been shot, and just hearing the solutions they articulate, that the answers are rooted in community, and oftentimes it takes kind of listening to community in a real and authentic way. And I think in Stockton, we're not perfect yet, but I think we're doing a good job at listening and honoring the experiences of young men of color and how are they experiencing the policies that we put forth. And then I think the third theme that's been really, really important to me is this really an orientation towards policy. I'm of the opinion that policy is very, very important, especially for policymakers, more so than programs. I think oftentimes with My Brother's Keeper or Boys and Men of Color work, the focus is on mentorship and things like that, which definitely matter and matters and definitely is important. But without a robust policy agenda, I fear that our efforts will be in vain. And that's why I'm excited to see so many of the priority bills you guys are putting forth, especially Assemblymember Weber's bill in regards to local control funding formula. Because as we all know, education is one of the 6 milestones. It's a key. But if districts are getting money to work with vulnerable populations and young men of color, but the outcomes aren't changing or the money's not being spent in a way that's going to improve their status and then the policy doesn't have its intended effect. So my second recommendation would be leveraging LCFF funds and seeing seeing what stipulations we give to districts to ensure that when this new infusion of money is spent, that it's spent on evidence-based best practices that are, to your point earlier, that have evidence and track records of success that really boost the status of young men of color. In terms of what the city of Stockton has done on the policy side, we're able to ban the box. We're able to allocate more money to summer youth jobs. We've been able to establish an Office of Violence Prevention. Our police force is going to go in procedural justice training. It's part of the president's 21st century policing task force. So we've been doing good works, but I think the biggest gap is in workforce development. And in meeting with folks and in talking to people and knocking on doors, now people need jobs, but especially our young men of color. In our Brothers Keepers report, it was heartbreaking for me to find that in South Stockton, which is my district, we had the most employment opportunities, but also the most unemployed youth, and that 45% of all African-American youth and 36% of all Latino youth in South Stockton between 18 and 27 were either unemployed and not in school, and that's a huge number. And for Stockton, California, the state in this nation to really reach out to its promise is going to take really investing in young people of color. So in conclusion, my final 2 thoughts are around just the hard work of coordination, and that oftentimes a lot of things facing the status of young men of color are in school districts or in the county. And as a local elected official for city council, I have a pulpit, but I have jurisdiction only over city council. So any way the state can help kind of get these institutions to work together. I know your hands aren't completely free there, but if there's any creative solutions for that, it will go a long way, because our young men don't know that the county's in charge of this and the school district's in charge of that and the city's in charge of that. They just know they sometimes may need mental health treatment, sometimes they need workforce development, sometimes they need jobs, and sometimes they need to establish relationships with police officers that aren't always criminal, be locked up. And then in closing, I would say that thank you again. This work is incredibly personal. First, as a young man of color. Second, as someone who has family members who've been victims of homicides and gun violence, with a father who's been incarcerated my entire life, that what we're talking about aren't just statistics, there aren't just feel-good things, there aren't just mandates from the president, but they're really about the future of California, the future of this nation, but it's also about people and families and lives and potential and opportunity lost. So any way we can be helpful in Stockton to the great work you guys are doing at the state, I would more than welcome to join in.
Good afternoon. Ricardo Morales, an 18-year-old youth that fathers and families. Sam King, and I'm here representing I'm here representing the youth, and I'd like to start off by thanking you for representing the BMOC work here at the Capitol. I like to share a little bit of the experience that I've had in Stockton being a young man of color. There's a lot of gang violence, drugs, discrimination, poverty, and luckily for me, I found this organization, Fathers and Family, and they helped me, they supported me. We here in Stockton, or over there in Stockton, we lack support our parents, and at Fathers and Families, they supported me to, in the next few weeks, I'm going to be graduating thanks to them. I know I wouldn't. I'm going to be the first in my family to actually graduate. Now they're helping me attend college. And they put me on the first, I'm sorry.
Okay, take your time.
They put me on a plane headed to Denver to participate in the All-American City Award, which we won. And I think, in my opinion, we won was because of the youth and the formerly incarcerated participants that we had really touched the judges. And this work is important to help out fellow youth such as myself who don't have support or anything, no help to get them off the streets, help them out. And on behalf of the young men of color in the state of California, we have been ready to take the MBK challenge. The question is you.
The question is, are you?
Are
That's
you?
a good
Are
one.
you?
Good one, Ricardo. I always feel like it's important that when we're talking about young folks, that we really engage young folks. And the centerpiece of our work is young men like Ricardo, who embodies and symbolizes so many of our young people's struggle, and are able to actually articulate that here. And there's nothing more powerful than when our young people find their voice like that and are using it in a responsible way to advance these initiatives on the ground. The other day I was driving with my son. I was taking him to soccer practice, and he looked over at me. He says, "Daddy," he's 12 years old. He goes, "Daddy," he goes, "my teacher asked me what you did." And I said, "Well, how did you respond, son?" And he says, "My daddy helps people." And I think there was nothing more beautiful than that. He doesn't care about executive director or titles or anything. He says, "My daddy helps people." And I thought that was so beautiful that he says that to me. And I said, he goes on to say, then he asked me, how does he help people? And he goes, "My daddy says you got to show up, you got to pay attention, and you got to speak the truth." And I just wanted to acknowledge you, Chairman Bonta. I wanted to acknowledge you, Assemblymember Garcia, and Assemblymember Thurman, for showing up for our kids, for our babies. Thank you so much. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for fighting the good fight, because I know how challenging this work can get sometimes in the community that we love and I love hearing the fact that this is universal. It's a universal struggle, and everybody can benefit. When a rising tide lifts all ships, everyone has something to benefit. This transcends young men of color, but I know sometimes it's a challenge, and there are sometimes we got to fight for the things we believe in our children and our future of our children, because this is not just data. When we start sharing data, this is our life experience. It is through our own lived experience that we know that we have 2 out of 10 third graders in Stockton that are not reading at proficiency levels. We know what that means in the future, to the future of our city, to the future to our babies. We know that Stockton has a direct file transfer rate of juveniles into adult court 3 times higher than the state average. And we know that these problems are not going to be alleviated by the solutions or policies that kind of created the conditions. We know that also it was only appropriate that Oakland mayor and Oakland folks came up first and addressed some of these issues, because we have a shared struggle between Stockton and Oakland, and we need to recognize that a lot of folks in Oakland are now residing in Stockton, and that we need to support all people in the state of California, and be very mindful of some of the trends that folks are moving around and migrating, and sometimes it's forced migration because of displacement and gentrifications. Yet in our city, despite the obvious struggle that we have with literacy and also juvenile crime and charging our children as adults, we only have 49% of our children ages 3 to 5 in Stockton Unified School District, or 49% are not enrolled in early preschool or kindergarten, so they don't even have a running chance. And so these are policy issues. These are policy priorities, and I just want you to know that we are thankful that you show up, that you listen to the people of the state of California, and that you actually speak the truth in this building on a daily basis. At the end of the day, I think it's safe to say that our work is rooted in relationships of reciprocity, that it is only through relationships like this and relationship building that we can actually move the needle forward here in the state of California, make sure that California remains the great state of the golden state that it is, that has been known for. I will say that that it's very important, though, that we have young people here, that their voices be infused into this action planning, and that we humanize this data and understand exactly who we are fighting for, and that we celebrate with you all, policymakers like yourself and Council Member Michael Tubbs, who are actually putting some skin in the game, and really through not just words, but through their actions, are really, really advancing the priorities in the MBK challenge. And then also that there is some action behind it, that the plans themselves have some actual action and get some traction. So when our kids ask us that very important question, are you, or are we, or am I my brother's keeper?
Yes, I am.
That they understand that, yes, we are our brother's keeper. And throughout history, it'll echo, not just through our words, but through our actions, that we were our brother's keeper. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have us here. You guys have our plan. We've shared it with you all. We're hoping that we can kind of start to have these exchanges with the other cities that are running MBK strategies, and we're able to support one another's work and advance this collectively throughout the state of California. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nunez and Mr. Tubbs, for being the powerful, consistent partners that you've been. Really appreciate that. And thank you, Ricardo, for sharing your story, and congratulations on your successes. And we'll continue to do everything we can to support you and all the other young men that you're working with to be successful as possible. Want to open it up to questions?
You know, a comment, and then just I want to speak to our young person here, Ricardo, who's here. And let me just tell you, and I think it's important, you know, I am a product of an individual who got 3 or 4 second chances. I am here because of opportunities that were lent to me. And it's important to say that, right? Although the best decisions aren't always made when you're a young person or a young adult, that the opportunities, and there are people out there that remain confident in one and allows us to excel and ultimately reach what is our human potential, right? And I want to just express to you how important it is to have a youth voice here today to add to the work that we're doing. With that being said, there are a couple initiatives that we have put forward, and I hear a common thread here as it relates to employment opportunities for our youth, right? Aside from the cultural competency programs that are much needed for healing and recognizing the trauma that exists in our communities, I want to focus some of our efforts on our youth and employment opportunities. And one thing that we've put forward this year is making sure that out-of-school youth are incorporated into the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, and making sure that our workforce investment boards in our counties are working with community-based organizations to make sure that we're able to seek these funds and ultimately be able to bring forward the necessary skill sets based on the regional economies in the place to create opportunities of employment for our youth. And so I want to encourage you to take a look at some of those initiatives that we've put forward. The other is a bigger picture effort that we have along the same lines, where we're trying to focus on individuals with barriers. And we're talking about the reentry population. We're talking about veterans. We're talking about single mothers. We're talking about everyone who has a challenge to finding employment because of the structural, barriers that exist. And so I also want to just encourage you to take a look at some of those initiatives, because they fall along the same lines of the efforts that we have underway here. When I was in Brawley, knocking on doors, trying to get here, I had a young man tell me he's watering the grass. I'm knocking the door, wanting to give him a flyer and tell him about who I am. And he says, you know what, I don't care about that. You know what I care about is I want to get a job. He says, I just got out of prison. I got this little mark on my record that every time I go apply somewhere, I can't get an interview or a second interview once they find that out. And so, in the background, his wife, his girlfriend, 3 children running around the yard. And he says, I've got to take care of these folks right here. I got to take care of these kids. I got to take care of this woman here. Those were his words. And he says, but I cannot get somebody to give me an opportunity to give me a job. And so developing these partnerships within the framework of workforce training and development is extremely important to me. And so I want to just commend the work that you're doing in Stockton and raising the profile on the issue of making sure that we're creating these workforce development opportunities for our youth. So more of a statement, not a question. So thank you.
Thank you.
A quick question. It's broad, so sort of stepping back here. Mr. Tubbs talked about the distinction between programs and policy and how important policy can be. Obviously, what we do here at the state level is policy. On the ground, what do you think is the single most important policy change that we could make here in Sacramento that would affect the lives of boys and young men of color in Stockton?
Let me think first, so it's a good answer.
I think what we've seen is some of the policies that you all have pushed out, in particular through the Select Committee, have been amazing. I've been here. I could bear witness to how much thought has gone into some of the policies that you all have crafted with partnerships from folks in this very room. And I just feel as though one of the struggles that we've seen is the implementation side of those policies, because it has to go through the kind of local governance structure, which sometimes doesn't trickle down and have the impact, or it's not felt in the spirit of when that legislation was crafted. So really making this, and I think that the $100 million that's being asked to support BMOC and GWOC, girls and women of color, are a prime example of what our policies should be. I can have some foresight in terms of how it's implemented to make certain it reaches the actual community where the actual robust movement is starting to shape up in places like Coachella or Oakland. We know that it's not just policymakers that are actually, kind of creating the transformative change. We know there has to be boots on the ground. There has to be community-based organizations that are supporting these policies so we can ensure that they are realized, that the outcomes are changing as a result of the implementation of those policies. And oftentimes, too many times, it gets lost in bureaucracy and systems that are sometimes not necessarily keeping up with the pace in terms of the practices that need to be changed.